Good evening. Tonight we're looking at Unit 2 of the Eurasian Classical Age here. This is Chapter 6 of the Eurasian Social Hierarchies. We're going to discuss the difference between the systems of Chinese Class and Indian Caste. Very different systems with very different approaches in the way that society is organized. And you'll see as we go through this that both systems are somewhat rigid, but one a little less rigid or with potential growth and movement than the other. Both systems are used to define social hierarchy, whether Chinese class or Indian caste. You'll see as we go through this that I think both are also sort of so much sewn into the fabric of their civilizations and their society that they don't really consider it to be anything other than, at least at this time period, anything other than just being Chinese or being Indian. So as we flip through this, keep that in mind, that it's not like somebody sat there and said, okay, we're going to create the caste system, or we're going to create Confucianism, and then also set up a caste or a class-like system. You'll see here, you may be familiar with the pyramidal shape of, and the pyramid shape of what you understand to be the caste system, with the Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Sudra, and untouchables as that lays out there, with priests and academics at the top. And wouldn't that be nice if teachers were at the top of the social hierarchy of America? But I guess you probably think we are anyway, in terms of like intelligence and well, maybe in the case of like just good looking nature and humor. But you may not be very familiar with the Brady Bunch caste system. I found this on the web. It's kind of funny. It's a patriarchal system with Mr. Brady at the top and the three boys, his three boys, underneath that, and of course the girls, including the mom, at the bottom there, and the dog. Don't forget about the dog. And at the bottom of the caste system here is, or their caste system, I guess, is the more slavery type of person who was their live-in maid. If you've never watched the Brady Bunch, well, that might not be such a bad thing. So if you haven't, don't worry about it. If you have, maybe you find that funny. I'm not sure. The caste system is defined social groups more rigidly and with less opportunity for social movement than in many class-based systems. So a couple things to note here as we're looking at this, and this is definitely Chinese class that's being shown on here, a Chinese class system. There are twin foundations of the scholar gentry class. You've got wealth, which is primarily through land ownership, and also degree holding, and we think of that as like getting a diploma today. But in essence, really what it amounts to, in essence, really what it amounts to is not degree holding, but being able to say that you passed the civil service exams, which would give you the opportunity to hold a better job in the government. You see on the right people taking civil service exams or participating in the process of wealth or scholar gentry class. The Wu Di, which is the Chinese emperor who started the civil service exam system, but you could even state that this probably goes back to Confucius' ideas about education and what life was supposedly all about, that those who were more skilled and those who were earning their right to be looked up to in society should gain that opportunity. Okay. The caste system defines social groups more rigidly and with less opportunity for social mobility than in many class-based systems. That's the same thing that's written on just about every slide. I just want to make sure you're getting this through your head. For our test and for the purposes of the AP test, I doubt that they're going to ask you questions about all of the different levels of the caste system. However, they're probably going to ask you to compare the caste system to a Chinese class system like the one set up here, where if you pass a test or you have some kind of scholar gentry wealth, you're able to be looked up to as a larger part of society, or a higher part of the social ladder. So the caste system is very different. The Brahmin class were India's priests and seen as the highest varna, or caste. Kshatriya were the rulers and warriors. Okay? And I kid, but because I care. Obviously, I wish I was out there doing the yard, but I'm not today. I'm doing this video for you. So I was just kidding about Mrs. Duez. Hopefully, she won't watch this because she doesn't really have very much interest in world history, so I think we're good. India's traditional corporation, or corporate ladder as it speaks, and that's what this details on the right side. We think of a corporate ladder like the CEO being at the top and various business managers at the upper echelon. And then as you go through it, there are, maybe regional managers. And then there are people that run different stores or departments. And then at the bottom are the vast number of blue collar workers, or people who are doing, the real hard, difficult work. Now you could move up the corporate ladder, start in the mailroom, and end up upstairs on the corporate floor. That's possible. But with India's corporate ladder system that they call the caste system, it's a little bit different. It's very complex. 3,000 different castes. So don't think that this simple version that we're showing you here, and I'll back this up a little bit and to show you this, it's not that simple. There are many jatis, or jobs within the caste, that can be performed, and many times these castes are divided into subcastes related to occupation. There's 25,000 or so of those, and there are some benefits to this, and there's some negatives. The benefits are you're going to have a pretty proportionate number of folks working in the industries you need to have your civilization thrive and survive. But you're not maybe able to do the job that you feel like you were born to do or made to do, unless you're somebody from this system who understands that in the case of the caste system, if you were born into that caste, then that is what your duty or your job is to do. So, a little bit further look at this would be the traders, the Vaishyas, which our famous members include different people like Mohandas Gandhi, the independence leader, and the father of the nation, of this new nation of India that gets created. And that won't be told towards the end of our look at world history to show you how that works. I think it's chapter 23 for us, so we've got a ways to go there. The Sudras are your manual workers and servants. And you may say to yourself, wow, I thought that would be an untouchable group of people. Those folks, or the Dalit class, is even below the manual workers or servants in this caste system, this very rigid system. They were formerly known as untouchables, now called Dalits, and they perform unpleasant jobs like cleaning and leather tanning. And with some changes in India, the Dalits are becoming potentially being able to, become entrepreneurs or get jobs in the high-tech fields that there are out there. So there is some potential breakage in that untouchable system. In fact, you've got former presidents of India and political leaders and chief architects of the Indian Constitution. This is not as rigid as it used to be, but obviously in the past and in this time period, it's extremely rigid. Being an untouchable, there are lots of video clips on YouTube that can help explain this better than I can, and we'll probably see one of them in class, one where students go out and try to find out if there is such a thing as untouchability still in the world, or just the caste system itself. What you'll find today in India is in the more rural areas, the caste system seems to still be there, but has been supplanted in the more urban areas by this ability to rise through the workforce. Now, knowing some former students as I have who are from India, the way they explain it is this. They feel like there's not the caste system that there used to be. However, if you wish to marry somebody who is outside your caste, that may not be permitted. So it just kind of depends maybe upon your family and their relationship and how they look at the more traditional values of their society. So here are a couple of terms that I'm sure you've heard before: Dharma and Karma. Dharma is the Indian belief that performance of the duties appropriate to an individual's caste. Good performance in doing your duty or your dharma will lead to a rebirth in a higher caste. And eventually, this will lead to your soul reaching an enlightened stage or sense. Karma is this Indian belief that the force that's generated by doing your duty or performing one's behaviors in life that your caste specifies, that if you've done that in your previous life, then you move to a level at which an individual will be reborn in a higher caste. This is really difficult for the American mindset to come to grips with. I mean, we are about the here and the now, and how do you guys say? You only live once. There's no YOLO in Indian caste system. There's a belief that you're going to live again in another form, so you've got to do your duty well here today to get there. Now, some of our students who haven't grown up in that system would say to themselves, well, I don't get that. I don't think I can wait that long, and when I'm reborn, I won't even know that I performed well because I won't have an attachment to that consciousness any longer. This is just one of those things, a difference between Eastern and Western perspectives. The individualism of the West and a more of a collective way of thinking in the East, where you do your duty for your caste and for your people, your village, or your country, and for the main reason of saying, hey, I am going to do my duty well. It will provide me good karma. We think of karma today almost in a way like, if I do something good today, I've built up good karma, and then I'll have good luck tomorrow. That is not how they look at it in India. Not that simplistic and not that immediate. What you're going to see is this good karma is going to grow, but it's almost like the life force in a video game. So you've gone around and you've collected your gold coins or your gold rings or whatever it is the video game's asked you to do. You get to a point where you're low on energy or you die. Well, you'll respawn 7 seconds later in the game and you'll have another life. And if you've played some of these games, video games, especially some of these platformer games or first-person shooter games, a lot of them have that kind of competitive angle to it, where you do your duty, which is the task of the game, and you can see it across the top of the bar that you're building up your karma or your coins or what's going to give you the opportunity to have another life when you slip up and die in this one. It's not exactly the same, but maybe that gives you a better sense of understanding it. Let's look here more closely at China. And again, I'm going to reiterate this. The caste system defined social order in terms of religious ideals and ideas about the creation of the universe more explicitly and more closely than class-based systems. Okay? There's Emperor Wu on the left, the first civil service exams, as we said before. And on the right, I love to talk about this because I just feel like I'm playing the old banjo. Her name is Banjo, and maybe it's like Bon Jovi, I don't know. But a Chinese woman and a writer and a court official whose work provides really valuable insight on the position of women and patriarchy within the Chinese society. And you could also look in the Chinese system, and you'll see Emperor Empress Wu. And you want to say emperor, don't you? Because there aren't very many empresses, but there's this one. The only female emperor in the history of China who patronized scholarship, so she was very interested in learning, and worked to alleviate the position of women. Or elevate, sorry, not alleviate, she wasn't looking to do it, but elevate the position of women. And she provoked a backlash of Confucianist, misogynist invective. Let's tell you what that means. Confucianists believe in what? What are the 3, or you could even go as deep as 5 relationships that you have to adhere to and sort of cater to these relationships? The father, the older brother, the emperor. At the very minimum, you're going to be someone who is going to follow orders and do as you're told. That's a way to keep order in a very chaotic world. The women of that world, in the Confucianist view, were absolutely subservient to men at all corners, and it's similar to what we've studied in Athenian democracy in Athens, Greece, where women had to have someone escort them anywhere they went. There were very few places women could go in there, and they couldn't own property. They couldn't buy things. So you've got a woman who rises to become empress, and there's a long story with that. And I'm not going to get into it here because we don't have as much time, but we will in the future. But she, once she becomes empress, has this, and you'll see this with China. So don't think that it's always consistently going to be strongly Confucian with these strong Confucian ideas. They vary, and there are cycles with this, sort of like the cycles of the dynastic cycles. But there are cycles of very strong Confucian times, and there are cycles when it's not in favor as much. She provokes a huge backlash against this idea that women could be elevated in society. So the 3 obediences, like I mentioned, is this Chinese Confucian principle, and a woman is permanently subordinate to male control. Emperors, government officials, fathers, husbands, and even sons, eldest son. A woman would be listening to them as much as she would be telling them what to do. That's certainly true. The scholar gentry is this landowning families who reflecting their wealth from the land and their privilege that they derived as government officials. So they're scholars. They've earned it by taking the civil service exam. And they're gentry, or another way of saying that, like gentlemanly, I guess is another way of saying it. You're looked up to as someone in a higher class. The Yellow Turban Rebellion is a massive Chinese uprising, peasant uprising, inspired by Taoist teachings, with the goal of establishing new golden age of equality and harmony, and providing less Confucianist principles. This is something that you'll see here, and it's that cycle I was telling you about, where the Chinese will sometimes have very strong periods of Confucianism and then maybe a weaker or step back of Confucianism, or maybe a Taoist principles. We saw before legalism, and also Buddhist principles may come into play. In this case, a Taoist leader rises to power, and we'll learn more about them as we go through here and study China in the next unit. Kind of recapping this, to give you what you need to know for the test and to understand, is that the caste system is extremely rigid, and they both systems are using a social hierarchy. However, how can you move up in class if you're a Chinese person, and even potentially be a woman, and one woman does this, become empress? It's very simple. It's through the civil service exam. If you've proven your worth, you can move up and be elevated in class. You could own land then, and your family will benefit from that. But your sons certainly would have to go through that same civil service exam situation to continue to gain that for them. So in a way, that's sort of like rising and falling on your own merit. And that gives some structure. There's certainly structure in these class and caste systems, but less so in China. Something not mentioned in here that I want to bring up and talk about is the view of merchants in China. The Chinese weren't always catering to the peasants very well or to the farmers very well. No society does well with that, especially early in the world. But they look at merchants or people who are selling things and look down upon them in a big way. They look up to those people who have earned their position in the world by testing through the civil service exam and showing their worth. So the merchants and traders that come into China and delivering with them all kinds of goods to trade along those Silk Roads we're going to talk about in the next unit, they're important. They also bring with them a new idea called Buddhism. And we'll see it change form from the Theravada version of the original ideas of Buddhism to a Mahayana Buddhism. And the reason it must change forms really is that the Chinese people don't really trust what's being brought to them. They look at it a little bit differently, and they don't look at merchants or people who are selling you things in a positive light. There's a lot of distrust there. Another way to consider that and think about it is like this. If you go to the mall and there's somebody comes running up to you trying to sell you something, buy this cell phone, try on this lotion, here's some perfume, whatever. There are people that and they drive me nuts. I'm just like stiff arm time, right? I'm giving them the Heisman. Just leave me alone. The Chinese felt the same way. Do you want people calling your house at dinner time and bugging you to vote for somebody or to buy this or buy that? Or somebody coming to your door and knocking on your door and asking you to buy this, that, and the other thing, soliciting you. And so the Chinese are very against that idea. It's kind of ironic today because they're economically powerful based upon these new principles of capitalism that they've instituted on top of their communist government. Now, the other part of this is that you may say to yourself, well, how did merchants survive? How were they able to do business if the Chinese didn't want them around? And obviously, you need trade. China is one of the greatest civilizations and empires, basically, that have risen in this. Certainly, this semester, it's number one in the entire world. There's nothing in the world that can match what the Chinese might has going for it. So merchants must be somehow successful. Well, they are very successful. How are they successful? They're successful because of what Strayer terms backdoor relationships, which means that they're not doing business in the front. The people are going around the back to the back door. They'll knock on the back door and do business with the people who are the scholar gentry or the wealthy people of China. So openly, they didn't like merchants, but there was this unspoken or not talked about relationship with merchants and people of wealth, obviously, because they want to get things and own things and trade. But I think it's important to consider that because if you look at the class system in China, I don't want you to forget about the fact that although farmers and peasants are low in the class system, they're viewed highly, seen as important to society, as is the scholar gentry, but they also have an elevated position because of their wealth. Towards the bottom is their feelings on merchants, and they're not very comfortable with the idea of being sold things. And in some ways, that's a Confucianist principle where you don't want to be buying what other people are selling because you want to make it yourself, do it on your own, or trust in the system that's apparent there and set up for you to accomplish your goals. And you don't need the outside world to help you do that. So hopefully this helps you a little bit with Chinese class and Indian caste. It can be somewhat confusing. I've tried to very much simplify it here in these notes. There are not a lot of notes to write, but if you get the idea of the Chinese being a less rigid system, and where's our one thing that we've really focused on here, that the caste systems define social groups more rigidly and with less opportunity for social mobility. That's what you really need to know. We'll see you next time, and we'll continue our talk on social inequalities with a special focus on Rome and China as we get prepared for the test on unit number 2. Till next time, don't forget to be awesome.